Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope that you came back today to get some more information and try some more fun math at home while you're on your break. And if you did come back, you're in luck because we are learning about baking, like I said. But you also get to see my doggie. Come here, Layla. Layla says hello. Layla, look at the camera. So now you get to see my doggie too, and that always makes everything better. So I am going to give some advice for parents, if parents are watching this video, on ways that you can make this appropriate for really any age group, starting from pre-K all the way up through the junior high level, which is what most of my videos are about. So students, if you are watching this by yourself, then you can go ahead and skip this part because it has nothing to do with you. And when you see me hold up my giant whiteboard thing, then replay the video. Okay? All right, so parents, here are some ideas on ways that you can make this activity work for your kids and make it more than just baking cookies together. So for preschool students, kindergarten age, that type of age group, this is really a good hands-on activity for them to just practice their motor skills, and also working with them on following directions and just really teaching them the processes involved in baking. So teaching them how to scoop the ingredients with the ingredient cups or use a spoon to transfer it over, and then showing them how to stir up the ingredients and talking about why it's important to fill the measuring cups all the way up, because that's what the ingredient asks for. So we have to make sure that we don't overflow it. We have to fit it right inside. And kids just really like to help, and they like to be a part of something. Just know that it's probably going to get messy, but when you're done, have them help you clean up. That's an important life skill for them to have as well. If you have early elementary age students, this would be a really good time to just practice their reading. Now, not all of your early elementary school kids are going to be able to read all of the words in a recipe, but practicing some reading with them is a really great idea. And then also working through following directions with them. So even if they can't read, reading part of it to them and saying, okay, find the cup that matches this number on the recipe, and showing them once again like how to scoop, how to flatten out the stuff off the measuring cup, why we only pour the milk up to a certain line, things like that. And you can, all right, that was all the suggestions that I had for that one. If you have middle elementary school kids, this is really, really easy to work with them on. They should be able to read just about everything on the recipe, and working with them on understanding what it is that they're reading, because a lot of times kids can read words, they just don't fully comprehend what they're reading. So making sure that when they read it, they are taking and applying that reading to what they're doing is really, really important. You can also work with them on understanding fractions, because that is something that students struggle with a lot. So in this recipe, we'll have quarter cups and half cups, and talking to them about what is a quarter cup, what is a half cup. If you wanted, you could draw out like little circles. They're used to seeing like the circle pizzas, and cutting it up into fourths and halves and eighths and talking about that. You could also do like some experiments with them. So if you have a quarter cup, then take this quarter cup and see how many times dumping a quarter cup into a whole cup will fill it up, and talking about the fact that, oh, well, that took 4. Why do you think it was 4? Well, how is that related? Same thing with a half cup. It's going to take 2 dumps. And just practicing those skills with them and helping them to really think through what are these fractions actually representing would be a really good skill for them to be practicing at home as well. And then if they are really great at reading and they can read through the directions, let them do it. Let them try. And if they're about to mess something up, stop them. Have them go back and reread and try again. Try and be as hands-off as possible so that your students are really able to learn from the mistakes that they are making, and not just telling them exactly what it is that they have to do to fix their mistakes. Have them go back and look in their reading and figure out in the recipe what it says to do and what they did wrong, because that's another really important, not only life skill to have, but a skill that they need to have in the classroom as well, to be able to go into their reading and figure out what is it that the author wants me to know and how do I actually talk about this. So if you have basically 5th through 8th graders at home, then this is the perfect level for them. You don't need to make any adaptations, so they can just watch the video and try it, or you can do it with any other recipe that you want for cookies. I just picked one that was a pretty simple recipe that most kids could do without a whole lot of guidance. So I hope that you guys enjoy, and I hope that you are able to work with all your kids and with what skill levels they are at, to be able to have some fun and family time along with working through math and reading skills with them. So here we're going to go ahead and get started. So here is our recipe. Oh, that's a little glary. Let me see if I can fix the lighting. That's a little bit better. Okay, there we go. So we're going to make some no-bake cookies. So this is going to require you to use your stove, but you don't have to bake them in the oven. So here I have my recipe, and this recipe says that it makes about 30 cookies. And if you're like my family does not probably need 30 cookies because there's only 2 of us at home. So we're going to make half of this recipe. All right, so we have to think about, how do we figure out what half means? So with the amount of people that it's going to make, we can start there. So if we're doing half of our recipe and we're making 30 cookies, we need to think about what is half of 30. Now, there's a lot of different ways for you to approach this idea. So we're going to talk about both. There's really 2 that we'll focus on, okay? So if we're cutting something in half, that means we're splitting it into 2 equal pieces. So one way that we can approach this is through division, and we want to take and split this number into 2. So that means that we would take our numbers and we would divide them by 2. So in the case of 30 cookies, that shouldn't be too hard of a math problem for us to do. And just like we talked about in my last video, try to not use a calculator at all on this stuff, and really practice just how do we do the math to be able to work this out. So we are going to do half of our 30. So 30 divided by 2, which if you don't know what that is, you can work it off to the side here. So 2 goes into 3. You see that? Yeah. 2 goes into 3 one time. 1 times 2 is 2. Subtract and bring down your 0. 2 goes into 10 5 times. So if I'm going to make half of my recipe, I am going to make cookies for 15 people. Okay? So I can't just take and make the regular recipe. I have to cut all of my ingredients in half as well. All right? So the first number says 1/2 cup of butter. So I'll hold this a little bit closer. Hopefully you guys can see that. 1/2 cup of butter. So I need to figure out what half of a half is. So lots of different ways we can do this. But we're really going to practice using our multiplication and division instead of drawing pictures. If pictures is where you're at, then use pictures, but most of us are probably ready to move on past pictures and just do standard multiplication and division. So we could divide 1/2 by 2, just like we did with the 30, split it into 2 pieces. So we'll take this approach for the 1/2 this time. So I'm going to do 1/2 divided by 2. So I can't just do a fraction divided by a whole number and move on. If you guys remember, we have to do something with these numbers. So think in your head for a second. If you know what to do, pause the video and do it. If you don't remember, here's your first hint. The first hint is we have to make this whole number into a fraction. Second hint, that means that we put it over 1. And then you have to remember, what's your rule for fraction division? Keep, change, flip. So we keep the 1/2, change to multiplication, and flip over the second number. So this turns out to be 1/2 times 1/2, which is 1/4. So this will mean that for my half recipe of cookies, I'm going to make 1/4 cup of butter is what I will need. All right, my next number is 2. So I need to split my 2 in half. Now, dividing it by 2 would be pretty easy, but I'm going to show you another method. So if we are doing half of the recipe, if we think about what of means in math, that will tell me what I need to do with my numbers. So if you pause and think for a second, what does of mean? We talked about it in the last video, and we talk about it all the time in my classroom. Of means multiply. So I'll take my 2 and my 1/2 and I multiply them together. So 2 times 1/2. Now the same thing happens here where I have a whole number. So in order to do multiplication and division with fractions, all my numbers have to be fractions. So I put my 1 over 2 and I would multiply straight across. Top times top, bottom times bottom. So that gives me 2 over 2. So if I take and reduce that fraction, that means we do top divided by bottom. That will give me 1 whole, or 2 halves makes a whole. So I know that I'm going to need 1 cup of sugar. So there's another approach. Now just pause for a second and let's think about what our outcome have been the same thing if instead of timesing by 1/2, I divided by 2. So let's check it. That would have been 2 divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so we get the same thing. So it doesn't matter what you do, whether you choose to multiply by 1/2 or divide by 2, you still are going to end up with the same answer. So I want you to think about which method did you like best. Did you like to divide by 2 or multiply by 1/2? Or do you want to do both of them? And you will finish that with the rest of our ingredients, okay? So I'll go ahead and hold this up a little bit closer to you so you guys can see what all of our numbers say here. So go ahead and pause the video and copy these down and finish halving your recipe. So I'm just going to quickly go through and check and see if you got your half recipe correct. So our 1/2 cup of milk should now be 1/4 cup or 1/4 cup of milk. So I got that by doing 1/2 times 1/2, oops, not 1/3, equals 1/4. Okay, for our cup of our 1/4 cup of cocoa powder, that's going to be 1/8 cup now. I'm going to put CP for cocoa powder. I don't have time to write that all out. And I got that by doing 1/4 times 1/2 or 1/4 divided by 2. For a 1/2 cup of peanut butter, we should get 1/4 cup of peanut butter, which is what we did up here already. For 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, I will get 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. So with that, if you did 1 divided by 2 and you worked that out, you would have gotten 0.5, which is the same thing as a 1/2. And we want to keep this all fractions because when you go to do your measuring and stuff, your fractions are the only way that you're going to see your measuring cups. Or you could have done 1 times 1/2, and that also would have given you a 1/2 teaspoon. And then the last one is our 3 cups, and that will now be 1 1/2 cups of oats. I got that by doing 3 times 1/2, which equals 3 over 2. And if we take and simplify that fraction so that it has a mixed number instead of an improper fraction, you figure out how many times does 2 go into 3. Well, it goes in 1 time, and it will have a remainder of 1. So that would be 1, that's where your whole number goes. The remainder is the numerator, and the denominator stays the same. Right? So here's our recipe for half our batch of cookies. All right? And I'll show you these directions here in a second. I'm not actually going to bake with you guys because I do not want these cookies laying around my house. So we'll just go through all the ingredients and supplies that you're going to need, and then I will put the board back up and you can pause the video and read the video screen for all the directions and another look at the ingredients, okay? So the first ingredient says that we need butter. So for butter, it says 1/2, or it depends on if you're going to make your whole recipe or your half recipe. So you can have your butter. If you use butter sticks, a 1/2 cup is an entire stick of butter, so that's really convenient. And if you're going to do half the recipe, then you just cut the butter stick in half. Or if you have tub butter, that's fine as well. The next ingredient is called granulated sugar, excuse me. And that's just basic white sugar. So most people usually have sugar laying around their house. Our next ingredient was milk. So any kind of milk that you have will work. Doesn't matter what type it is. And if you don't have cow's milk, you could use almond milk or whatever as well. And it should work just fine. You need unsweetened cocoa powder. So that's just the cocoa powder. A lot of people buy the Hershey stuff. This is the bargain brand. So if you have that laying around your house, then you can make this. You need creamy peanut butter. You don't want chunky peanut butter. It would work, but I don't think that the cookies would turn out quite as good. So creamy peanut butter. And vanilla extract. So vanilla usually looks like this. And then the last thing is oats. And in my house, we don't use quick oats. We only use the regular oats. And these regular rolled oats would work just fine as well. The cookies turn out a little bit different, but they would still work if you only have regular oats at home instead of the quick oats. A couple other items that you'll need to make these are wax paper or parchment paper. So you have your parchment paper or your wax paper. It doesn't matter which one you use. Whatever you have laying around is fine. And if you don't have these, you could probably make them just by wiping down your countertop and making sure it's real clean and then scooping the cookies onto your counter. It will be a lot more of a mess to clean up, but you could still do it that way. Or scooping them onto a pan or something like that. And then you will also need measuring cups. So if you have a measuring cup like this, that will be really good for when you do the milk, but you don't have to have that. You also will need, these are called dry measuring cups, and because you usually use them for things like flour and sugar. So you'll need measuring cups that look like this, and if you don't have the liquid measuring cup, you can use these for the liquid items as well. And then lastly, you are going to need teaspoons, and you'll need some sort of pot to put on the stove to melt everything in as well. All right, so there is our items that we need. Let me see if I can get this without a glare. Maybe if I move my computer's location. Oh, it's not the greatest, is it? All right, so there's our ingredients. You want to pause and write those down, okay? And your instructions. There we go. All right, have fun making your cookies. If you don't want to make these cookies, make a different batch of cookies and practice cutting the ingredients in half and get some math in for today. So good luck. Let me know how it goes.